Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a topic that's truly foundational to our world. It shapes everything from the simplest tools we use to the cities we live in, yet it often stays out of sight, out of mind. Mining. We've just absorbed a stack of fascinating source material, really a deep exploration into the history, the intricate economics, the undeniable environmental impacts, and even the unfolding future of mineral extraction. Our mission, as always, is to unearth the most important nuggets of knowledge from these sources, giving you a shortcut, really, to truly understanding this essential yet often quite controversial industry. What we're really diving into today is mining's inherent paradox. Think about how utterly reliant we are on its products. Everything from ancient tools to, well, advanced spacecraft.
Yeah.
Yet, as our sources point out, we're often, and I quote, less fond of the holes in the ground needed for their supply or the wastes that accompany most mining operations. It's quite a striking disconnect, isn't it? And prepare for a bit of a mind bender right out of the gate. Gold. That shimmering symbol of wealth, the ultimate aristocratic metal that has captivated us for ages. Our sources reveal something pretty astounding. For most of its history, it was, practically speaking, the most useless metal.
That's right.
Its practical applications beyond currency and decoration are actually a surprisingly recent thing. That's just one of the surprising facts we're going to unearth today, so let's get digging. Okay, let's unpack this. Our sources highlight how minerals have been absolutely essential, meeting uniquely human needs right through the ages, securing food, shelter, providing defense, enabling transport, even jewelry and money. It's really no coincidence that entire ages of cultural development are named after minerals or their derivatives: Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, Steel Age, and today's nuclear age.
It's truly remarkable how deeply, how inextricably linked mining is with the very fabric of human progress. Looking at the historical evidence, the earliest mining was likely done by hand, just breaking stones for tools, maybe as far back as 450,000 years ago.
Well,
Then we see the first recorded instance of, let's say, large-scale, organized mining by the Egyptians in Sinai. That was for turquoise, around 3400 BC. For a long time, mining was relatively small-scale, usually close to where people lived, and because of that, it tended to have minimal environmental impact compared to what we see now.
and then came the real game changers, didn't they? Technological leaps that fundamentally altered the scale and scope of mining. The invention of dynamite in 1867. How did an invention like that change things so drastically beyond just making digging easier?
That's a crucial point. Dynamite, and actually other advancements that followed modern machinery, bulk haulage systems, they enabled a dramatic transformation in how mining operates. Modern mining now occurs at a much, much larger scale. We're talking about ore production rates that can reach a staggering 100,000 tons per day, maybe more.
100,000 tons per
Yeah.
day.
Per day, yes. And the total excavation, if you include the waste rock, can sometimes exceed 500,000 tons per day at the world's biggest mines. This massive scale often means operations have to be far from existing population centers,
Right.
which in turn requires creating entire self-sufficient mining towns, often built from scratch, with hospitals, airports, seaports, power plants, extensive road networks, all to support the mine.
That shift in scale is just staggering. It sounds like it brings not just opportunities for, say, development, but also a massive responsibility. What are the practical implications for the land and the people living near these huge operations?
You're absolutely right. This massive scale creates both significant opportunities for regional economic development. These projects can really become a nucleus for growth. But it also brings considerable challenges. We're talking extensive land clearing just for mine access, vast open pits that completely alter the landscape, and generating huge volumes of waste rock and tailings, all of which require really careful and often costly environmental management. And this brings us to a key challenge. What actually happens to a mineral beyond its initial extraction? Our sources highlight what they call the mineral cycle. It charts a mineral's entire path from cradle to grave. Mining is only the very first step in this complex journey.
And what we learn is that minerals are essentially non-renewable resources. Their natural regeneration cycles are incredibly, almost unimaginably long, thousands, maybe millions of years.
Exactly.
Which means the Earth is effectively a closed material system,
Yeah.
implying there are firm, undeniable limits on how much we can use. We can't just keep taking forever.
Absolutely. And this concept of limits, it isn't just about the physical availability of the resource itself, which, as we see with things like water and land scarcity, can become a problem tied directly to price. It's also critically about the environment's ability to act as a sink.
A sink.
Yeah, its capacity to absorb discharges, emissions of pollutants, wastes, without suffering serious long-term damage. Sources mention Al Gore's work on CO2 emissions and global warming as a prime example of this sink limitation being reached.
Okay, that makes sense. If these resources are effectively finite, how do we extend their useful life in our economy? Recycling seems like the obvious answer.
It is.
Our sources present it as the most common and vital way. They point out recycling saves primary raw material inputs, which reduces the need for new mines and all their impacts. Plus, often, processing secondary minerals takes less energy, especially for things like aluminum.
Indeed. The aluminum industry actually was a pioneer in recycling, precisely because of the enormous amount of electrical energy needed for primary extraction from ore. It just made economic sense, besides the environmental benefits. And for some minerals, we've achieved remarkably high recycling rates. In Europe, for instance, the share of secondary fraction, that's the amount of scrap used in total production for silver, copper, and lead, is over 50%.
Over half.
Yeah. And for steel, aluminum, and zinc, it's hovering somewhere between 35% and 50%, so significant amounts.
Okay, recycling that seems like the elegant solution,
Yeah.
but is it really that simple? What are the catches? What prevents it from being a universal fix?
That's where the real complexity lies. Our sources note it depends on a whole interplay of factors. The relative cost of recycling versus digging up new stuff, primary production, fluctuating commodity prices make a big difference. Government incentives like deposits on cans can help. Even geography matters. Recycling is most economic, near large cities where you get lots of recyclable materials concentrated. Plus, sometimes the way a mineral is used in a product makes it really hard or even impossible to recover effectively.
Can you give us an example of how those complexities play out in the real world?
Certainly. Take the case of battery lead recycling in Germany. It's detailed in case 1.1 in our sources. Now, on the surface, it seems like a practical, environmentally sound solution, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
But it faced numerous challenges. Initially, there were no incentives for people to return old batteries, so they just got dumped anywhere. Even when they brought in penalty and reward systems, the infrastructure, the collection, and transport networks weren't really there. Then, actually dismantling the batteries proved difficult and generated a whole range of nasty, hazardous byproducts.
Oh, okay.
And, ironically, during the 90s, the market was flooded with cheap primary lead from countries with much looser environmental laws, which undercut the recycling efforts. It just shows that a truly successful recycling scheme needs everyone pulling together, government, consumers, industry, working in concert. It's not easy.
And this complexity, it extends to global mineral flows, too. Our sources reveal a pretty stark disparity. Developed countries, only about 20% of the world's population, consume roughly half of its mineral reserves, and they're increasingly relying on imports from other nations.
That phenomenon directly creates what's known as the NMB, not in my backyard syndrome.
NMBY.
Yeah, where developed countries are increasingly closing off areas to new mineral development, often because the public perceives mining as inherently damaging or undesirable nearby. But this immediately raises a fundamental question for global society. If not in your backyard, then in whose?
Good question.
It really highlights the challenge of sharing environmental and economic responsibilities equitably around the world. That includes both the responsibility for potential environmental damage and the responsibility for providing the raw materials the world needs.
Okay, so beyond the geology and the economics, mining's true impact often unfolds on the ground in communities, which leads us to one of the most contentious debates. Is a natural mineral resource really a curse or a blessing for the country that has it? Mines operate within this complex, interconnected web of economic, environmental, social forces. It makes them inherently political, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That political dimension is especially apparent in developing countries. They often find themselves economically dependent on international mining companies, or maybe more accurately, on the home countries of those companies who are the main consumers. Many also exhibit what's called a dual economic structure, a small modern sector, often linked to the mine, with good infrastructure alongside a much larger traditional agricultural society. Large mining projects, unfortunately, can sometimes reinforce these existing distortions. They might appear to benefit the already rich, maybe at the expense of the poor, and that can lead to significant social disruption and controversy.
Our sources point to the Philippines, in case 1.2, as a prime example of this tricky dynamic. Despite being rich in minerals, things like high corruption, restrictions on foreign ownership, and unclear land rights have really hindered investment in new mining.
Yeah, and this brings up a critical concept: security of tenure. Essentially, it's the right of the discoverer to actually develop a mineral deposit they find. Mining projects require huge, long-term upfront investment. We're talking years of effort, hundreds of millions of dollars before seeing any financial return.
Yeah, massive risk.
Exactly. So any doubt about that security of tenure, or maybe the threat of governments changing the rules later, like imposing windfall taxes just because commodity prices spike, that can be enough to scare off future exploration and investment altogether. It sends a signal that agreements might not be honored.
And we also hear about significant tensions when mining companies maybe ignore local customs or uncoded legal traditions, focusing only on the national laws that are easier for outsiders to understand. The Bougainville copper mine in Papua New Guinea, that's case 1.3, is mentioned as a stark example of what can go catastrophically wrong. Mutual misunderstanding, inadequate benefit sharing with locals, it led to long-term conflict.
And from a broader perspective, the resource rents, all the direct revenues a nation gets from a mining project, they can be absolutely substantial, huge sums of money. However, they are too often shared by a very small number of people. Typically, the national treasury gets the lion's share, maybe 90% or more.
Or 90%.
Yeah, leaving local governments, who often bear the brunt of the development's impacts, with a major disparity. And that disparity often fuels resentment, which then gets directed, perhaps unfairly, at the mine operator.
We also learned about the economic practice of high grading. That's where companies selectively mine only the richest parts of an ore body, setting a very high cutoff grade. Our sources explain this is common in artisanal small-scale mining, but it can happen with larger companies too, under certain conditions. And the result? Often highly disturbed areas left unrehabilitated, sometimes with mercury contamination from processing. Plus, it leaves behind lower-grade ore that's no longer economic for anyone else to mine, essentially sterilizing it. That's case 1.4.
And then on the environmental front, the most obvious impact of mining is just the profound change to the natural landscape, the hole itself, the waste dumps. But beyond that direct footprint, there are also secondary environmental effects from what we call induced development.
Like what?
For instance, building mining roads improves access to previously remote areas. That might inadvertently open those areas up to illegal logging or hunting. There's a really crucial disconnect here. Global society demands these minerals, right?
Yeah.
But it's the local communities and their immediate environments that bear the primary environmental and social costs.
The Freeport mine in West Papua, Indonesia case 1.5 sounds like a vivid illustration of all these complex dynamics playing out. It's built in one of the world's richest gold and copper deposits, contributes most of the province's GDP, provides significant funds for community development. Sounds good so far. Yet it faces intense controversy over how it disposes of tailings directly into the river system. And there are accusations of violating indigenous people's rights. Plus, the rapid population growth in the town nearby, drawn by the mine, has apparently led to significant social strain.
Indeed. Our sources do acknowledge that while mining inevitably causes profound environmental and social change, modern practices, if they're properly implemented and planned for, can significantly mitigate the negative effects. They can even actively promote local and regional development. Ultimately, whether a resource becomes a curse or a blessing really, quote, will be determined by the commitment of both the host country and the mining company to equitable and sustainable development. It truly comes down to that shared responsibility and genuine commitment. So the mining industry has a genuinely unique profile compared to other sectors. It makes it exceptionally challenging to manage effectively. Its demand curve, for one thing, is incredibly long and variable. It stretches right back to the dawn of civilization itself. This long-standing demand for basic commodities, iron, copper, gold, lead, cess, it's unlikely to just disappear, regardless of socioeconomic shifts or new technologies. Though the specific mix of minerals we need does widen with new tech.
That's a huge point. And tell me more about the practicalities of actually developing a new mine. It just sounds like such a massive undertaking.
Oh, it's absolutely a marathon, not a sprint. Our sources tell us it can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years just for the exploration phase, just finding a viable deposit.
5 to 10 years, just looking.
Just looking, yeah. Then you're looking at another 2 to 5 years for all the assessments, environmental, social impact studies, feasibility studies, plus navigating the necessary government approvals.
Yeah.
And then construction can take another 1 to 3 years, depending on the scale. All of this happens before a single ounce of ore is extracted.
Wow.
And it requires hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars in upfront capital investment. A modern mine just doesn't have the luxury of starting small and gradually expanding. You have to go big from the start.
Given those incredibly high stakes and those really long lead times, what are the unique risks involved? What makes mining such a challenging venture beyond just the cost?
Well, there are several distinct types. First, you've got geological or reserve risks. The uncertainty underground, Murphy's Law often applies. You can't ever be 100% certain about the mineralization between your drill holes.
Yeah.
Then operational and metallurgical risks. Things like equipment failure, human error, or maybe unforeseen characteristics in the ore that make it really difficult to process, like unstable pyrite, which can actually spontaneously ignite.
Oh, wow.
Then there are economic or market risks, commodity prices swinging up and down, competition from other mines that can quickly turn a profitable plan into a loss maker. And finally, country risks, often just called political risk, that covers everything from political instability and corruption to governments arbitrarily changing laws or regulations after you've already invested. Table 1.2 in our sources highlights some of these.
And beyond all those, there are the huge environmental and social risks, which can be absolutely catastrophic, can't they?
Absolutely.
A major environmental incident or some kind of public liability issue can lead to mines being shut down completely. And then there are the substantial cleanup costs under the polluter pays principle.
Exactly. Polluter pays means, simply put, those who cause the pollution are held financially responsible for fixing it.
And that's not even mentioning the immense reputational risk, especially now with global scrutiny. Everything's so connected.
You're spot on. The communications revolution has totally transformed how the mining industry operates. Word of an environmental incident, say, an acid spill or a tailings dam collapse, can spread worldwide in minutes now, often with photos and videos. That puts immense pressure on companies, on their share price, their financial stability. But on the flip side, it also allows for much greater transparency in environmental management. Companies can now inform stakeholders about their performance almost instantly.
Our sources trace the evolution of global environmental awareness really nicely, noting some major turning points. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring back in '62, the U.S. National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, in '69, and that iconic Earthrise photo from Apollo 8 in '68.
Ah, yes, the blue marble.
Yeah, that image profoundly changed how we saw our planet, didn't it? As this fragile pocket of life in a vast, lonely universe. These moments, and others like them, spurred this huge wave of environmental legislation. Now there are over 200 international environmental treaties, and many apply directly to mining.
So this naturally leads us to ask, how are societies responding to these challenges? Our sources make it quite clear that achieving absolutely zero impact from mining is essentially impossible. It just can't be done. However, we can actively respond. We can reduce the overall demand for minerals through substitution using other materials or through recycling. And we can decrease the waste generated through better management practices and developing new technologies. These are more long-term measures, but they ultimately relieve pressure on the environment.
And the push for environmental protection, it's evolved quite a bit, hasn't it? Beyond just the old big boot mentality of command and control setting standards and finding people who break them.
That's right. That approach still exists, but we now see a much more nuanced toolkit being used. Things like economic instruments, pollution charges, tradable permits, co-regulatory approaches like the environmental and social impact assessment, the ESA process are really important now, and even self-regulation from industry groups. The sources mention the Australian Minerals Council's voluntary code as an example that has demonstrably raised environmental standards significantly in many cases.
Tell me more about that ESA process. It sounds key.
It is. It originated from NEPA in the U.S., but it's evolved a lot. It started as more of a purely scientific exercise, but now it's really a pragmatic planning process. Crucially, it now actively integrates all the major stakeholders, and that explicitly includes local communities right from the early stages. The goal is to improve the project's design and how it's managed throughout its life. And this approach is now widely adopted globally, often through guidelines like the World Bank's Equator principles. Private banks actually use these principles to assess and manage environmental and social risks before they'll finance a major project. So finally, we come to this really profound concept of sustainability in the context of mining. The Brundtland Report famously defined sustainable development way back when.
Meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It's still the go-to definition, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It continues to resonate very deeply.
Our sources present this through that widely accepted model of the three circles of sustainable development. You've got the economic, the social, and the ecological or environmental. They're all fundamentally interconnected. And what's critical to grasp, I think, is that we risk messing things up in one system while trying to fix problems in another if we don't see that connection. It really demands an integrated approach.
Absolutely. And that integration also requires thinking about capital more broadly, not just financial capital, the money. It also encompasses natural capital, our environment, the mineral resources themselves, clean air, clean water, built capital infrastructure, machines, human capital knowledge, skills, health, and social capital institutions, trust, how we work together. The idea is that it's possible for the total capital to rise even if one form, like natural capital, is declining, say, by using mineral wealth to invest in education or infrastructure. But true sustainability really requires balancing all these forms.
This reminds me of the Almaden mine in Spain, which was highlighted in case 1.6. It operated for over 2,000 years. Basically a treasure chest for the Spanish crown, even used twice to guarantee huge sovereign loans.
An incredible history.
Incredible, yeah. Yet, it's considered a typical example of non-sustained development. Why? Because apparently very little of that immense wealth actually went back to the local communities. And there was no real effort to diversify the local economy for a future after the mine.
That example perfectly illustrates the different viewpoints on what sustainable mining even means. Because it might seem like a contradiction in terms minerals are non-renewable and all mines eventually close. But the concept of sustainability can still be applied. It just means different things depending on who you ask.
Okay, so for a mining company itself, what does sustainability look like in practice?
For a mining company, sustainability primarily means finding and developing profitable mining projects to provide consistent returns to its shareholders. That's its core business. It also means securing funds to find or buy replacement projects because their existing ones will eventually run out. Some companies, like Banquet Corporation mentioned in the Philippines case, have even diversified into completely different sectors, like real estate, to sustain the company during mining industry downturns.
Okay. And then from the community's viewpoint, how is sustainability defined for them?
From community's viewpoint, the focus is quite different and really important. It's crucial that the mining operation itself is not perceived as being sustainable because, as we said, all mines have finite lives.
That's a key distinction.
It is. So for a community, sustainability means being well-informed about that finite life. It means ensuring that their pre-existing ways of making a living are maintained or enhanced during the mine's life. And critically, that new income sources are actively developed to provide jobs and economic activity after the mine inevitably closes. This is how you try to prevent the ghost town phenomenon.
Planning for the end from the beginning,
Yeah.
essentially. And what about the environmental perspective on sustainability?
From an environmental viewpoint, sustainability means ensuring that environmental values, biodiversity, water quality, land capability are not permanently lost or degraded by the mining activity. In practice, this is largely achieved through extensive rehabilitation of the mine site once operations cease, trying to restore it as close as possible to its previous state or to a new, stable, and useful state. Now, where parts of the area simply cannot be fully restored, think about the sheer walls of a massive open-pit mine. For instance, then environmental compensation measures might come into play. Things like environmental offsets, where the company funds conservation efforts elsewhere to ensure there's ultimately no net loss of environmental amenity overall.
Okay. So what does this all mean for you, our listener, taking all this in?
What we've learned today, I think, is that mining is far more than just digging holes in the ground. It's this deeply complex dance between ancient human needs, rapidly advancing technology, intricate global economics, profound social impacts, and an evolving, increasingly urgent commitment to environmental responsibility. Yeah, we've seen how the very definition of progress itself has been fundamentally shaped by minerals throughout human history, and how our collective awareness of environmental limits, relatively recently in that long history, has truly transformed an industry that was once almost entirely unregulated.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to mull over after this deep dive. As global demand for new minerals keeps surging, particularly those critical for emerging technologies like electric vehicles, batteries, renewable energy, and as developed nations increasingly rely on mining happening in remote, often quite vulnerable regions of the world, how will we, collectively, ensure that the immense potential benefits of mineral wealth truly contribute to equitable and sustainable development for everyone and not just for some?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. Something to think about.